All right, so we are live again. It's Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, and we have here the my LinkedIn page. So follow me on LinkedIn so you can get indicators for all my live shows that are coming up. I also just started reposting everything to YouTube, so you can subscribe there and you can get notifications. And I'm just going to kick things off with one of my favorite charts that I always put up because a lot of people ask me about Power BI. There's still a lot of questions about Power BI. So to me, Power BI is the most amazing tool I have used. I started with Excel with VBA and got into pivot charts and pivot tables. And once I got into Power BI, I never looked back. And there's three competitors to Power BI. There's Tableau, there's Click, and there's and Power BI, of course. And about a year and a half ago, worldwide searches for Power BI overtook Tableau and ClickView, and that's kind of at the same time as when I think Google bought Looker, and around this time when the crossover happened was when what was other Salesforce bought what was the one, Ian? Salesforce bought Tableau.
Tableau, actually.
Yeah. So they bought Tableau, so that was a big deal. So that's one of the reasons, I was watching this trend, and then I also watched the Gartner Magic Quadrant of all the players in the BI industry, and Microsoft just took off, and we could kind of chime in on that a little bit. But so I do Power BI for marketing, and then I'm also now, as you guys know, I'm in connecting people that love data and love BI, right? So active on LinkedIn, connecting everybody, and trying to reel other people like John, my friend John here, into this world. So let's go with a quick introduction. So once again, Charles Elwood. Follow me on YouTube or LinkedIn now. I've got I'm going to post everything. But let's go down the list. Let's go Ian, then Eamonn, then John, and do a quick introduction of your business or where you're working.
Sure. So Ian Bowman, my company is Work Adaptive, and I help companies with business intelligence solutions. The type of companies that I usually focus on are not manufacturing, not e-commerce, but companies that have people running around trying to make good decisions. They might be truck-based, they might be professional services, but it's a lot of people and projects, right? And so you need to get this good overview of what all is going on in your portfolio of projects. Usually there are hundreds, sometimes thousands going on all over the place. So that's what I focus on.
I just want to chime in real quick before we, sorry, Eamonn, but one of the key things you were looking for is companies with PMOs or EPMOs, right? Enterprise PMOs, because that's an indicator of the type of company that has enough projects where they kind of lose track, and you're in there trying to help them give one single dashboard across all projects, right?
Yeah, now they're usually more focused on internal projects, but those same type of companies can also have a big pool of internal projects and a big pool of external projects. So both are my focus. So.
Oh, very cool. All right. So sorry, Eamonn, let's hear your story.
Yep. No worries. I'll just keep it very high level. So background is chartered accountant. My company is all of my data operate out of Toronto. Most of my focus is, given my background, would be very much a heavy finance focus. So using Power BI to build out P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, deep analysis on sales, expenses, pretty much you name it from a finance expensive. That's finance perspective. That's what I do. And there's a couple of areas that I have spent more time in within the data analysis arena, and perhaps one of them would be the resource industry up here. So I've done multiple companies from a Power BI perspective, but it's applying that sort of financial skill set that is merged with data analytics to almost any sector. But I just ended up in a couple of distinct sectors. So that's
you're in Toronto, and because of that, you're talking about the energies and mining and coal. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of gold miners up here. There's a lot of mining for precious metal type thing, and regular like nickel and copper, etc. So my focus has been not exclusively, but largely within that sector.
Gotcha. All right, and it looks like Greg is on the call and looking forward to the chat. And what's interesting is Greg has been in that sector too, and he trades in commodities. I think he's looked at data, and he kind of pivoted into that. I talked to him recently. Greg, if you got questions or post where you're calling from, which is, I think, Madison, Wisconsin is where he is. Eamonn, can I put your website on the screen real quick?
No, sure, yes, yeah, no, absolutely, and maybe I'll just get rid of a lot of this stuff. Yeah, please, yeah, go ahead.
So one thing I wanted to mention is Eamonn's website, all over my data. I think, so full disclosure, me and Ian are in class, obvious things class, and you can see the videos up top. But Eamonn's kind of famous in our circles because of his videos. I think these are links to videos, right, to your dashboards?
Yeah, there's videos behind the dashboards, yeah, to explain it at a higher or deep level. Yeah.
So I just want to show some of your cash flow, balance sheet, income statement. There's some amazing work here, and then I just want to highlight that you can go here and watch some of the videos to kind of look at how Eamonn has crafted and some of his art. So I call it an art, Eamonn, because you really you've taken this to a new level.
Charles, you're a charmer. I love you. Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yes.
So all right. So we got Greg saying, "Yep," from Madison, and so Greg, if you got any questions, we're seeing your comments come through, and if there's anybody else on the line, please post where you're calling in from. So I got my other friend, John Poirot. So John, full disclosure, we have known each other since high school. John worked in a fencing, I think, called Saul, and got me kind of introduced to fencing back in the day. And so there's a story behind that. And then you went for history, I think, right? Got your doctorate. Yeah, kind of tell your story.
A long time ago in another life, right? I guess my own career path is has lots of different steps, I suppose. But I guess the reason why I'm here today is because for the past, I suppose, better part of a decade or so, I've been teaching at Tulane University in New Orleans at the A.B. Freeman Business School, a business communication course, both to undergrads and graduate students. And while my specialty isn't BI, I suppose that I'm here today to make some general comments and give some advice, I suppose, about just business communications in general, which is, I guess, what you would like me to do, I suppose.
Yeah, and if you have other interesting stories about your garden or crawfish or anything, go ahead and add those too. John did warn me that he is a professor now, so the John I know from back in high school is a little different from very professional John that I know today. So,
Charles, it sounds like there's a bunch of secrets that should be kept secret. Then from Charles,
not on the live stream.
Lovely, I get it.
So John, I'm going to start with you a little bit because we're all kind of curious because we live in a bubble, right? Ian, Eamonn, and I, we live the Power BI world. That's all we see every day. All our work is Power BI. But you are on the outside, and you're at a university, and universities are potentially flooded with information too. And you and I have talked a little bit about it. But how has data and analytics been introduced at Tulane? And what type of data is being analyzed, let's say, at a university level?
Well, I mean, these days, I suppose they're analyzing all types of data. I mean, even at Tulane University, they're trying to track the kids' progress, the students' progress through the various programs, down to, in some cases, down to the assignment level, in order to help perfect and to improve both the quality of education and the student experience in general. All of the BI stuff that you do, the data analytics, is being used, I think, even at the education level, to, I'd like to think, to great effect, although I will admit that's not my specialty. I mean, I guess if I was brought here today, I suppose, to give my 2 cents, my advice, considering that your audience is probably made up of, BI specialists and enthusiasts and aspirants, I guess. If I had advice to give, I suppose it would be this. It would be that we should, both individually and collectively as a society, try to avoid, I guess, overestimating our own personal abilities and society's abilities to communicate with one another. I mean, we tend to, we walk around with little magic rectangles in our pockets that allow us to communicate faster, more efficiently, more effectively than anyone else over the course of human history. We look around at the literacy rate, for example, in the United States, which is somewhere in the high 90s. And all of that together sort of leads us to believe that we've kind of solved this communication problem. Somehow, we don't need to put any more work into it. Let's go learn something else with our time. But then somehow we spend the vast majority of time still screaming at each other over the internet for some reason or the other, right? We operate under that fallacy that somehow communication isn't a problem, that we need to continue to work on, skills that we need to develop. We also operate under the fallacy that if we, for example, are good at one style, one genre of communication, that somehow means that we're also great at, or that can be easily adapted to something else. And that's not always the case without training. For example, each semester, at the beginning of the semester, I always poll my undergraduates, who are mostly 18 to 20-something-year-olds, really intelligent students who come from all over the United States, frequently from all over the world. Tulane has a lot of international students. And I always ask them, I say, over the 4 years in high school or whatever the equivalent was, how many of you took some sort of professional writing or technical writing or something of that sort? And I'm lucky if I get one or two hands that are raised. So then I probe a little bit more, and I ask them, well, if you didn't do that over the course of your 4 years in high school, what did you spend all of your time doing? And inevitably it comes to, they spend a lot of time reading literature, doing creative writing, talking about how it makes them feel, and maybe doing some sort of literary analysis. And just to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with literature or literary analysis or anything of that sort. But it still boggles my mind that, we devote so much time, or so much of students' time, to that sort of training in high school, and such an inordinate amount of time to the kind of professional or technical writing that the vast majority of them are going to be doing over the course of their professional lives. So I guess if there is any advice to give, I suppose it would be that, if you have not already, taking some sort of business communication, management communication, some sort of technical writing course, either in person, online, read a book, something of the sort. Skills that, at the end of the day, no matter what your specialty knowledge is, in your case, all of the BI and analytics that you guys do, if you can't communicate that to colleagues and clients in a meaningful way, in a way that makes them want to listen to you, all of the other work you will do, all of the specialty knowledge you will have will be wasted. So I think it's to continue to perfect those skills, even though, you may be focusing on, other things, hard skills that make part of your day-to-day job. If you don't focus on those other soft skills, I hate calling them soft skills, because something that you have to do every day when you are dealing with clients, calling it a soft skill makes it sound like it's unimportant. But if you can't close the deal, if you can't, explain what you know to a client who doesn't have your particular skill set and your particular knowledge, it's all the rest of the stuff that will just be wasted, and all of your work will be wasted.
Yeah. Oh no, that's good points. Communication is important, and I want to come back to this when we'll go to Ian and Eamonn, but I just wanted to touch base with you. So one of the things we had talked about too was, in universities, different tools are used for data collection, right? In the accounting world, there's ERP systems like SAP, Quicken, QuickBooks, right, Eamonn, and then project management. There's like Microsoft Project, or people still use spreadsheets, Monday.com, Trello, all these new tools. But in education, you had mentioned that schools are trying to track assignments, progress, learning levels. What are some of the databases that universities are using and trying to track all this stuff with?
To me?
Yeah. Yep.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I is my own. All I can give you is anecdotal evidence, my own personal experience. But I think, there are a lot of teaching platforms, Blackboard, Canvas, things of that sort,
Yep.
that are used in classrooms at multiple universities. I think my best guess, and I don't know this for sure, is that they're trying to adapt those kinds of things to collect data, to track data. They already do to some extent for students.
Yeah.
I think they are. My guess is that perhaps they're trying to use those sorts of things to track data to then make the teaching process and the student experience even more efficient behind the scenes.
Right. So, and then for us, for those of us that aren't in education, so Canvas and Blackboard, you log in, you type in the grades and student ID, grades, the assignments, etc., and then it records that in the app and then in the database, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So we're going to come back to you a bit more on the communication stuff. I'm going to jump to Eamonn real quick. So Eamonn, as we saw in his dashboard, and we got a question from Raul too. So tell us a little bit about your journey into accounting and business, how you got into that, and then, what were you doing this in Ireland before you came over to Canada, and then also kind of how you got into Power BI too, because
Sure.
if you want to talk a little bit about that journey.
All right. Well, without going back too far, because I love me, what's your hobby? We could be here for 2 hours, so I'll chunk it very quickly. So I think the reason I went into business accounting, it was business first, business degree, and then it was into accounting. I think historically had intended to become a doctor, but on the advice of a bunch of people, they said, well, do you really want to do that? Maybe your skill set is more sort of focused in the business world. So I ended up doing that. And so basically did a business degree, then joined, which then was one of the top 7, Grant Thornton in the UK, and trained and qualified as a chartered accountant. And, after that, a lot of my time was I moved into industry, and I suppose one of my last roles would have been like a group financial controller of a large like pharma type business, managing a team of 10 people, and I suppose the reason that I got interested in this is if you've lived the life on the other side, which is you've got maybe 1.5 million lines of data hitting you on a monthly basis, and all of your time is being spent basically just keeping the ship afloat, but you can add no real value to your to the users in the business. From an analysis perspective, if your total focus is looking at, say, monthly management accounts, forecasting and budgeting, but you have a bunch of your senior boys and girls saying, from a sales perspective, the sales director is saying something like, it'd be really useful if I could track, the sales, the margin, and indeed the profitability based on all of my product lines. And I want to be able to look at it based on all of my customer base. And I want to be able to, look at how are my sales guys doing, and are they giving away chunks of the product at a reduced margin such that their numbers look great, but we're making no money. All of that sort of thing, and managing sort of risk profiles from a business perspective. Have we got too much of our total sales in maybe 2 or 3 customers? So all of that stuff for me is where real business intelligence lives, and basically working with working in a company where we had 3 systems that were spewing out about 1.5 million lines of data, and those 3 systems didn't talk very well. You very quickly understand that you need something in addition to what you've got, and certainly Power BI was not around at that point. So basically, I moved into Excel, pivot tables, and then Power Pivot, etc. And then I suppose I came across Power BI, I'm guessing about 4 years ago, because it was doing very much what I was doing within what I would call very advanced pivot tables with charting and hooking it up to Power Query and interrogating databases and stuff. And And so from my perspective, Power BI is just allows me as a user of it understand fundamentally what guys and girls need from a financial perspective, and then build out the business intelligence associated with giving them entirely that, from often something that could be 100 million lines of data that we're tackling on an annual basis. So it's taking up gobs of data from very different data sets and making it talk nicely with each other, and allowing the user have the business intelligence that they need, the sales directors, the guys in charge of purchasing, the guys in charge of inventory, the information that they need to actually run their part of the business, if that makes sense. Well, I'm not sure if I've answered your question entirely. If not, please.
No, I think so. The way this show kind of works is you spew all that information, your story, and then I'm just listening and like, wow, there's so many memories and things that I've went through that are similar to yours, right? So I'm just going to talk through. I was at a company and we had 5 different databases, and actually some weren't even in databases. Some departments used Google Sheets. We had 4 or 5 SharePoint lists. We had a SQL server, and then we had Salesforce. Also, there were 6 different databases that we wanted to combine. And Excel just, if you brought them all into Excel as a flat table, and there was so much redundant information, it would just slow down to a crawl. And then, so what we did is we took all 6 databases, combined them together, and then once you built it out in the star schema, it was so fast. The time to insights, you didn't have to wait for IT to mash the data together, or people to extract it into Excel and combine it with VLOOKUPs and spend hours and hours doing that stuff. I mean, the data just refreshed 8 times a day, and your insights were there, And I think like what you're saying is, and then you had the flexibility to ask all these questions. Is like, well, tell me which department or what day, or you could have all the lookup tables just mashed in, and on the fly get the insights so fast. It made me a hero, right? So that's the change. The pivot point for me was when I had made something in an Excel, pivot chart, and it was just one database, and it took forever to run. There were so many lines of code to this thing that was 6 different databases, and it was instantaneous, right? The insights. And I was like, wow, this thing is, when I saw that, I was like, this is so powerful. And it sounds like you've been through a similar situation where you could solve your biggest problem, which was data not talking to each other in 3 or 4 different databases, and you could get the business insights immediately. Right?
Totally. I'll just add one other thing, because I know Ian, I'm sure, wants to chat, is certainly my feeling from a Power BI perspective, part of the reason I really like it is it's from the Microsoft stable. They've built Excel, they've built that very well, and they've built this at least as good, if not better. But I think, in addition, it allows you to step into a company and give a company almost what's equivalent to Fortune 500, what Fortune 500 have spent literally tens of millions of dollars building out in terms of a dashboard capability with high-end systems. You're doing exactly that for some of the smaller to mid-sized businesses. And once they see it, they realize this is what we were missing. And that's not in any way evangelistic. This is, once you actually see what this stuff gives you and your ability to drill down and drill through into various parts of your business, you never look back. It's almost going from dial-up to 250 or 500 megabytes. It is that different, in my view. Now, that's it. Let me sort of pull out a bit, because I'm sure Ian pointing up.
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because you were still evangelizing, but we've seen what Power BI can do. So
no, totally.
It's good to reiterate that this is game changing. Like I really think the businesses that adopt it are going to have a competitive edge ahead of everybody else.
Honestly, I really do think that the businesses that adopt this, they're going to be so far ahead of the competition. Actually, one last thing I would say, and this is just the ability to step into a company. And most companies are a bit like individuals. their systems are very, very different depending on how the owner and then the next layer decided to build it out. But the ability to just walk into that and within a somewhere between maybe a 2 to 6 week period, completely pull everything together and give them, and I emphasize real business intelligence, not just visual bling. I could care less about visual bling. Being able to do that and stepping into any business where the businesses are so different from each other, but you can actually pull very, very meaningful insights for the actual key players within the business, I think is a game changer. I really do.
Yeah. No, it's very true.
Chat. Yeah.
All right. So we'll give Ian some airtime here.
Sure.
So Ian, you brought up a great question earlier today on Slack, is one of which is deployment. And I'm just going to tee this up for you. So at one company I worked at, when we switched from, I built a prototype in Excel, and we were sending with pivot charts, and we were sending the Excel file around. And then the next step is downloaded PowerBI desktop, and then I created a PBX file. And then that was the second stage. I emailed that around, so people would have to download PowerBI desktop. And then kind of the next transition was I started sharing to the PowerBI service. And at that point, got a few people on a pro license. And then I had some on-prem servers. So I set up some gateways to get the data up to the service. And then once we tested that with a couple of people, we got them pro licenses. Then we started expanding to multiple pro licenses. And I know I can find it, but there's a website by Microsoft that does a calculation between like a premium enterprise level license versus, getting a bunch of pro licenses. And the break even, I think, is, there's kind of a space between like 200 employees to 700, kind of this kind of vague area where you're like, should I get pro or should I go all the way premium and just get it for the whole company, right? But that's kind of the sequence that I went through for deployment at one particular company. So I just wanted I know you brought that question up, and maybe you have some stories on great deployment or implementation methods for Power BI, or some struggles, that you're currently still seeing.
Sure. Yeah, a couple things. First off, did you see the stealth lunch delivery? That was awesome.
I did. I watched that happen. What are you having there, by the way? That's meatball.
No, that's a sausage sandwich. I guess I'll wait for that until we're done. But that was pretty awesome.
That was it.
So a couple things, coming to my mind as I'm listening to you guys talk. So a lot of my background is organizational psychology in school, and then some product and process development within companies. And so a lot of what John was talking about with the communications being a key resonates with me. And I think one of the things that happens, and I'll tie it into the deployment / adoption thing in just a moment here, but is that when you're spending all your time analyzing the data and trying to just get rid of the errors that pop up and all the little things that you have to do when you're doing a very manual process for that, honestly, you're exhausted by the end of it, right? The very manual Excel way, let alone that you're going to have to refresh it again next week. And so the time and mental capacity that you have for actually looking at what that data might mean, crafting it into a communication, it just gets squashed because it's time to get on with the next refresh and cleanup and all that stuff. So, it's not about saving the 2 hours or 10 hours or however many hours of cleanup that you do each week. To me, it's about saving the time that you can then, as somebody knowledgeable in the business, knowledgeable about the data, use for communication. And I think that's a key switch, right? Because it's not just saving time like saving hours. It's increasing your ability to communicate. And it's interesting, a little side note. So one of my whys for doing this business is because I think that the education system, at least through high school, and I'm just learning about college, and my oldest daughter is sophomore, but it's got kind of this track, and it doesn't necessarily focus, as John mentioned, on the business communication. So my daughter, sophomore, and number one of 4 kids that I have, today did her first presentation to one of my clients who was gracious enough to say, yeah, I'd like to hear what she has to say. So she researched the topic they were interested in. She brought it up. We worked back and forth, and she was able to do it. And I got to help her kind of craft that message a little bit. And that's part of my why, is to be able to involve my kids where it makes sense with some of the family businesses and that kind of thing that I deal with.
Right.
There are others that are a bit more corporate, and it doesn't make as much sense. Certainly not going to do my sophomore daughter present to an EPMO just yet, right? Okay, so communications as the outcome of being able to do the data analysis much faster, I think is key. Now, to come back around to the deployment thing for a minute, it's really easy, I think, to get locked in, and we were actually talking about that this morning too, into the kind of mechanics of, I got these licenses, just a little bit like what you were describing a minute ago, but there's an adoption cycle that's happening on the other side of that, right? The client needing to think about who it is they need to communicate with, win over, show them how it works, it being whatever it is, make the case for, all those sorts of pieces that kind of have to go lockstep in implementation from a more technical perspective. And that is often the hardest part of any change. And so, a lot of my background has been in product management, process management, like I mentioned. And that communication / giving people the opportunity to learn and come along with and pull what they want into existence and have it be, their idea as much as a technical push, I think is some of the key stuff. And that's kind of special about Power BI. Not only, I'm sure there are other things, but because it's lower code, faster iteration to get to value, you don't need to kind of separate the business research as much from the technical doing of things, right? It doesn't need to be like, yeah, we're going to take your specs up front, we're going to hand it off to the technical team, who's going to go code for a few weeks or months, come back, and then we'll show you something. Like, it can be, hours, days to the next iteration. And that really lets that communication cycle, I think, happen much more fluidly, and you can very quickly just discover, oh no, I see it now, but that's not what I meant, right? Let's veer over here, right? And that's what I love about it, is sort of the ability to pivot as you adopt. I've definitely have done enough implementations now that I'm starting to get this kind of pattern forming in my mind of the adoption step that people have to go through, and considering governance and other things that are beyond just the technical or licensing as they go through. So yeah, I'm sure we'll chat more about that as we go along, either today or other days. But that was what was top of mind for me.
Sure.
Wow. Yeah, no, great points. The adoption is an interesting one. And that's going to lead into a question for you, John. So, in some data sets, like GPS data that comes out of a sensor, super clean, super easy to collect. I can put a GPS chip out there, and it just spits it out, and then I've got a million lines of data a day later, and I can plot things, right? But one of the challenges I see for education, especially in writing, is there's a lot of subjective metrics in it. And one of the things that we forget about too is, when I get my data for analysis, it typically is already clean, and it's in nice columns and nice rows, and it's pretty, data integrity is there, and all the coding is done correctly. But, does that pose a challenge for somebody like you, John, who's grading and, now has to read through these papers and take all these metrics and transfer them in? I'm guessing that's a bit of a challenge for you, right, on the data side of things, inputting the data.
I mean, if evaluating the quality of any sort of communication, the written word, was entirely objective, I guess I would be out of a job. So the fact that it isn't both keeps me employed, I suppose, and also, makes evaluating it more difficult.
Yeah.
You're constantly evaluating not only what you're writing, whatever document you happen to be looking at in and of itself, but also comparing that to others, constantly to come out with some sort of scheme that evaluates them all fairly. How you do that, how you clean up the messy data, how you get over that step in order to track student performance over time, I suppose is the difficult thing that I'll be honest, I myself don't know exactly how to solve it. I'm gonna leave that to you guys.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big challenge. And I've been at some companies before is, the data collection, if it's not automated, can be so overwhelming that it'll destroy a BI or a data project pretty quickly, just because, there's so many ways to evaluate. And communication is changing so fast too. Like we discussed the other day, people are getting bombarded right now with emails, with resumes, and you can't write the 10-page long resume or the 10-page long emails anymore, because the first thing people do is click that delete button, right? So you got to be concise. You got to get to the point. And we've had this discussion too, right? Maybe talk a little bit about how communication has changed recently from what you've seen, especially in business.
Well, I guess I can't really in one short live stream, I suppose, give you all the keys that I give to students, I suppose, over the course of an entire semester. But I guess if I had to boil it down to something, I mean, it is all about clarity and concision. I mean, part of when we put together a document, when we present it, we frequently make the mistake of assuming that the reader, the listener, is going to help us out along the way. I think what we need to remember is that if when people are listening to us, when they're reading something that we put together, if anything that you do makes them stumble, makes them pause, makes them have to read that twice, we're not living in a world where they're going to stop, slow down, and try to figure it out. Nobody has time for that, and no one's going to do that. I mean, remember that the burden is on us as the person producing that document, that dashboard, that whatever, to make what we produce as user-friendly as possible. Because if it's not, if the user has to put any effort themselves into it, there's a good chance they're just not going to. They're going to skim it, skip it, throw it up in the air, and walk away. In which case, again, all the time you've put into that, all the work you've put into it is wasted. So just like Ian was talking about a minute ago, not only do you have to, crunch all of this data, analyze it, put together, even if you put it together in a nice dashboard, in many cases, I imagine you have to explain how that dashboard works or the patterns and the trends you found to your particular client. In some cases, you may not even have to explain that just to the client for the client's sake. You're probably explaining that to the client so that the client can explain that to their client, right? So it's not, there's a teaching step in there that I think is probably crucial. Perhaps that's what Ian was getting at. I think it's all about brevity, clarity, concision. We're not living in a world where people like their time being wasted. So
yeah.
If you stretch out, if you make it more complicated than it should be, you're just going to lose them.
I think that's huge, and that's going to lead perfectly into Eamonn. We're not living in a world where time, people don't want their time to be wasted, right? We're living in a world where people value their time a lot. And Eamonn, you have taught me some wonderful things with YouTube. Number one, playing in 2x speed. But I'm going to note that your videos, you already talk fast, so with 1x speed, I'm good with that. Number two, you've done something amazing in that, and I'm going to share a little trade secret of yours to our audience, but you actually post videos inside your PowerBI content. I've heard you talk about that a little bit, which is phenomenal because it's you communicating, walking them through a visual representation on how to use the report and teaching them something, but giving it to them in a way that they can just play it back at 2x speed if they want to relearn, 6 months later. It's so much value because it's a recorded piece of teaching content that you send with the content, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, how you came about to that conclusion, and any reactions from your clients on those videos that you've gotten back recently?
Well, just from John's perspective, is like I really do think that communicating something clearly and succinctly is really, really important. And certainly for me, what I found out over the last number of years is that if you can put it in video format, just like we're doing here, it's far easier. Although we have instantaneous interaction here. So if I say something and I can see non-verbally you don't get it, I can quite quickly correct on the fly. I can't certainly do that in the written word. And to an extent, I can't completely do that from a video perspective. But what I find is this, is that many people are more visual learners than they are readers. And if you're going to write out a big report as to how to interpret one dashboard out of multiple dashboards, you're going to find that most people will just lose interest. Whereas if you can put that same thing in a 3 to 7 minute video, then normally what happens, and it happens, I would say almost all the time, is that the client really appreciates it, because it's kind of like you being with the client every time they have a problem, because you're talking them through like the key metrics within the dashboard they're looking at and how to interact with the same dashboard, and then saying, look, I've flagged 3 to 5 really important metrics, but there's another 10 plus in there. Go play with it. And because you've set it up such that you've shown them how to do it, then you take the fear away. And ultimately, you'll see from an engagement perspective, if you don't include the video, engagement on a scale of 1 to 10, i.e. using the dashboard, could be at a 5. If you include a video for each of the dashboards that's embedded into the dashboard, so they don't have to go look for it, they just click on a tiny little icon and it opens up. Then you find that the engagement goes from a potential 5 out of 10 to more like a 9.5 out of 10, because you've removed the fear. Yeah, so certainly from an explainer stroke training type analysis, I find putting together a video is probably the best way to do it. And even if the video doesn't hit the mark, like how long does a video take? Really? You've built it so you know it intimately. And if the first video isn't quite hitting the mark from their perspective, which doesn't often happen, it's really just a matter of spending another 10 minutes and trying to build in and layer in the 2 or 3 things the client thinks their entire team needs in addition to what it is you just said. So yeah, so for me, I think video is key, and it really does help the user of the dashboard understand it in terms of the first time they ever see the dashboard. But in addition, it helps them if they leave the dashboard and 6 weeks later they're coming back to it. It's a complete refresher on how does this work again. And indeed, if they pull in new team members into their group, then nobody has to go explain it. They can say, look, step here, click on this little button here, and the guy who built it is actually going to explain exactly how this works. Yeah. So
brilliant.
So
Eamonn, I think the most important part I think you said there was the fear. I still hear this today as I release a dashboard and I've got filters and stuff, but because of Excel, where you could go in and really click on something and accidentally delete a value or, and kind of ruin the whole report and the whole data set, there's still a fear of that. And for you to create a video and say, hey, I'm the author and it's okay to click this, watch this, watch this, watch this. Like you said, it alleviates them of that fear. It's like, oh, Eamonn's doing it, I can do it too. Sure. Well, yeah, brilliant stuff. And I want to bring this over to Ian a little bit. So talking about fear, well, all humans feel fear, and it's an interesting thing. And with something new, there's fear of change, there's fear of using something new and maybe, the handshake, working with something new. So Ian, are you seeing any trends in fear? Are there any fears still out there? As you talk to clients, what's their biggest fear to adoption of Power BI?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I think there are at all different stages of adopting it. So for the person who starts building the reports, it might be excitement, that it does something that they want, and then fear of, oh man, now where was that thing again? I can't find it. Like there's a whole navigation thing that when you're just starting to build stuff in Power BI, I think comes up. A little further on, there's sharing that thing out with multiple people because you've worked on it hard and it's something new and you don't know if they're going to accept your idea. There's, does management think that this thing that has been worked on is valuable, or are we still in proof of concept, and why aren't you just doing it the way we know how, right? In Excel, like they told you, I think there's little bit further out from that, you start to get, like, let's say you've got a little bit of traction, you've been working with a certain type of data, and now there's other data that would be really helpful, like more financial oriented, or just data that is treated a little bit more privately within an organization. So it's like, how okay is it to include this? And lots of people involved in that, and not necessarily always aligned on how, so you kind of have to work through some of those things. And each of those is a, and more, right? But so the security around the data, all that kind of stuff. But each of those is a fear point, and interestingly, it's often about like, how will other people interact with this, or how will other people need to weigh into this decision or judge my decision to use this approach, right?
Wow.
On behalf of users of something new, right? And some people just love it, and they want to do it. But a lot of people who've especially worked in a large company or worked in a company for a long time, right? There are ways to do things, and you know them. And so you're doing something new, you're putting yourself out there a little bit, and it feels risky.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard a lot of those fears through some of my clients. Yeah, that people have their silos. They protected the data before. Now you're exposing the data to the rest of the corporation potentially, and people can see where your own failings are. So there's a fear of having the data out there shared with the world. So that's fascinating. I think I'm going to take that clip of, and we're going to repost that, Ian. So we're going to wrap that in some. So I think that was a pretty powerful clip there.
Charles.
Yeah.
This is Eamonn. Just to add something further to what Ian said, is that certainly from a fear perspective, if I take it to a meta level, within all of the businesses out there, certainly what I see is that you have the innovators that are actually, from a corporate perspective, company perspective, running with the product. And what I'm finding is the sort of the mid level that are kind of waiting to see what their competitors are doing and who else is using it. Yeah. That's beginning to shrink. So I think from a sort of a meta fear level, it feels like the 3 to 5% of innovators, that's expanding really quite aggressively. Yeah. And it's pulling from that middle section that would normally wait a much longer amount of time before they'd ever actually look at implementing it. And I think part of that is the fact that, again, as I mentioned earlier, because it's coming from the Microsoft stable, I think there's a huge level of trust. And the fact that, although many people don't get it, the fact that it plays so well with Excel, I think that becomes, so I think from, as I say, a meta perspective, I'm seeing that fear that used to be quite intense. Actually, it's becoming almost diluted in a really good way, because there's a lot more innovators actually looking at this. The percentage is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Eamonn. That's an awesome trend, because we're crossing that chasm from early adopters kind of to the middle of the bell curve, where companies are starting to realize there's other people doing this. We need to catch up, and we have these fears, but if we don't alleviate and move forward and take action, because I'm getting a lot of inbound people too that are saying, I've heard about Power BI and I want you to come help us get on board if this train is taken off, and we're behind. So there is that trend. I'm starting to see that too. So we're at 48 minutes. So typically I plan this for 30 minutes, but we have great content, and we'll typically go to, we'll go close to an hour even on this show. So John, I'm going to go round table, and maybe for you, maybe think for class. How long have you been teaching now at Tulane?
Tulane, probably the better part of a decade.
So a decade. So over a decade, are there certain things that students have picked up, or that you have taught them, or they came and showed you in an assignment or something that you thought was brilliant, that's going to change the way they communicate and the way they interact with the world? Or is there something that you teach them? Like, what's a piece of advice, if you could summarize all those 10 years to those students right now? It's like, hey, if you take my class, here's the one thing that top of my head, I think, if you can take out of my class, this is going to help you out.
I don't know, Charlie. I say a lot of stuff in a semester.
Yeah.
I guess if I had to point out one thing, I suppose it's I mean, especially now, I know I said I didn't want to talk about COVID, but since we are living in this day, I mean, the ability to adapt. I mean, if the fact that, just you guys have run with this Power BI thing over the last couple of years, and not only that, but being able to collaborate online is not something that we could have done a few years ago. I mean, when the school system shut down, when we were all sent home from campus, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago, I mean, we just kept from home using Zoom and other platforms, and that could not have been done even a year before. So, it's when I like to point out to my students that, over time, the devices are going to change. Platforms are going to change. You guys are specialists in Power BI now, but obviously a few years from now, there may be something else. Who knows, right? But I mean, if you focus on the fundamentals, at least for my stuff, not the kind of stuff you deal with, but if you focus on the fundamentals, that is the spoken or the written word, whatever device you're using, whatever platform you're using, whatever it happens to be, if you can communicate with clients, if you can crunch the numbers, whatever platform you happen to be using in the future, you'll still be able to do that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I do think the name of the game is being able to adapt, and you guys are adapting using Power BI now. In the future, that might be something else. But if you can do it now, why can't you do that in the future again? So it's, being able to roll with the punches, even when things like COVID and with the economy and the murder hornets and whatever it happens to be, as those things are tracking across the country. I think the name of the game is being adapted.
So thanks, John. I wanted to piggyback on that comment a little bit. So what I saw, I helped co-teach, or I spoke at 2 of your classes, right, over Zoom a couple months ago, and I wanted to point out one amazing thing that happened. Right, we had a student reach out after the talk and send me a LinkedIn message, and in the message he had personalized and said, Mr. Elwood, thank you for coming and talking to your class. Your notes about LinkedIn and connecting with people was spot on. Like, talk about innovation, adapting, and using, everybody else. 99% of the LinkedIn connections I get have no personalized message in them. This student took the time and adapted and was innovative and sent me a personalized message, right? And there was fear, I imagine, being a student reaching out to a professor's friend, but he did a masterful job, and I kudos to him for overcoming his fears and adapting and writing that message. So I just wanted to mention that was something amazing I saw in one of your students too. So. All right, Eamonn, so I wanted to go to you real quick. So we're going to have probably some people that watch today that are afraid of financials. I think, was it yesterday? We're like, man, nobody, who wants to do that stuff? Only Eamonn, right? That's the comment. But, kind of the fears going into, and then maybe some advice for somebody going into that arena, or maybe think back to a DAX wall or a time when you were struggling with DAX and how you overcame it. And if there's some advice for somebody that's at that point now, that's looking to you and like, wow, Eamonn has all these crazy videos. How did he get to that point? Did you ever have a time when you struggled?
Well, I think certainly coming from a background where I thought I was fabulous in Excel, because I could build out a whole lot of stuff, then, certainly, and I mentioned this before in perhaps a different chat, is that then I wrongly assumed that I could step into Power BI and within 3 to 4 months have the same skill set. So it is a different skill set, and it takes some time. And, if you're going to step into this, just from a data analytics perspective, you must give yourself time and you have to work it. Yeah, because there comes a point where you do actually end up becoming as good in this as you may have been in something like Excel. But you're probably looking at, I would say, up to 18 months before you get there. And that's actually putting in the reps. That's not doing it sort of like weekend warrior stuff. In terms of like, combine that from a finance perspective, what would my advice be? Look, I think anybody thinking of getting into finance, if you can layer finance and Power BI together, because you've got both skill sets, it becomes a really potent mixture. It really, really does, because you can competently talk to the CEO, CFO of any company, understand precisely where their pain points are, and you can drill into, whatever level of detail they need to get to actually fully understand what their pain points are. And then you can actually build that out from a data analytics. So I would say, understanding the fundamentals of, being able to look at a company and understanding their P&L, their balance sheet, their cash flow, and being able to take and do deep analysis on anything within that business, the sales, the expenses, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all that stuff, then you have a very, very interesting skill set that will serve you well, I think, for a very, very long time. Businesses are not going away, and data is not going away. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And the ability to harness the data and be able to have meaningful conversations with very senior people is really, really important. And I think it's difficult to do that if only you have the data analytics skill set. But if you can combine it and you decide to step into the finance stroke data analytics area, it's actually a very potent mixture, in my view.
No, Eamonn, that's a great point. We had a gentleman last week, Tyler Benhauser, and his advice, I asked the same question every time, but he said, figure out what your passion is. And then if you can take Power BI and data analytics and combine it with your passion, you will be number one, because you will excel past everybody else that's in that niche, that's in that market.
I totally agree.
Yeah, you're analyzing the patterns in that data in that market and combining it with something you really want to do, and then going forward. So we're going to jump, Ian, thanks for that, Eamonn. And we're going to jump to Ian, and kind of the same question is, somebody struggling going into PMO project, program management. They're struggling. They're like, is this the way to go? And then Power BI, if you have any struggles with Power BI, what's your advice to those people at this point?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer a little differently than the question you asked, but just to tie it together, what we're talking about here, there are new things come along all the time, and you need to, I think, embrace them enough to be able to figure out how you can use them to adapt. Right, to John's point, I love adapting. That's part of the name of my company, right? Work Adaptive. But so embrace it enough to kind of get a feel for it, but don't feel like you have to do it all yourself, right? Look around for people that can fill the gaps. Maybe you're not going to spend 18 months learning to do Power BI at an expert level, right? But you have the ability to communicate and share the learnings from that with other people in the organization. So partner up and do that. And then that it goes for, I would say that includes things like being on video, like we are now, right? I can remember, I just default to put on the video every time I'm on with a client for anybody these days. But I can remember a time not so far ago where I was just a little self-conscious about it. I didn't know if I wanted to be on. And now I don't even think about it. So if you move past that, then there's this whole nonverbal communication thing that can be part of the communication stack, right? So embrace the new, try it out, be a little uncomfortable for a while, and adapt it where you can, right? That's my advice.
Very good. Yeah, Ian, so a lot of adapting, lots of discussion about fear. What a hour full of information that people can use. And I'm going to adapt and change. And when I post this on YouTube, I'm going to try to get that link at the top here that says you can click here to, watch my other videos or whatever. So I'm going to learn something new and adapt to this. So if you guys can hold on to the second, I'm going to end the broadcast, and we're going to chat live after a little bit to wrap up. So thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.